Welcome to the Know Your Ship podcast, presented by eHub. I'm your host, Frank Dolce. So Jeremy and I bonded over, we got to know, Jeremy was at Skull Candy, running Skull Candy. We got to know each other there. And then we started going to lunch at Thai food pretty regularly.
That's right. You introduced me to a great spot.
Yeah, that's now closed, unfortunately. And then we discovered we both have this passion for college football. Me with Utah, Jeremy with BYU. But it's an interesting relationship because we can talk about both without any animosity.
Oh, it's like, I love talking Utah football. And by the way, the saddest thing that happened to me in my life is that I spent time with Kyle Whittingham.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and yeah.
I fell in love with him.
Yeah, that's the problem.
I'm like, I can't hate him anymore.
That's what happens. That's what happens. He's very engaging. And you wouldn't necessarily think that when you see him on
There's a reason sideline. He's a winner.
He is a winner.
He's compelling.
Too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Are we all ready?
Yeah.
The whole crew.
Dolce far niente.
Here we go. Welcome. The man who needs no introduction.
Frank Dolce, it's nice to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. Do you have any questions for me?
Wherever we are right now.
Yes. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate this. I know you're a busy guy. Thank you for taking the time to be here with me today. Of course, this is the one and only president, CEO of Traeger Pellet Grills. That's Jeremy Andrus right there. You look as good as I have ever seen you.
Frank, flattery always faileth. But I will say, when you have kids that are 16, 14, 12, 10, and double 8, you got to stay in good shape.
Right.
I got going a little late, and my kids ensure that I stay super fit.
Yeah.
Otherwise, my boys will beat the crap out of me.
It's the best fitness program around.
It's incredible.
I did too. We started late with our kids as well, and I felt an obligation to make sure I was getting miles in, road work in,
100%.
hitting the gym, because I didn't want to get beaten on the trail or on the soccer field or whatever we were doing. I still had to be, in charge.
I've got twin boys who are almost 8, and they play 3 sports this season. And so I've got to stay sharp.
Yeah. You look sharp, the best of times.
Thanks for saying. Whether you believe it or not, thanks for saying it. Felt good to hear.
The real athlete in the family is probably your wife, who was an international swimmer, correct?
Yes, she was a synchronized swimmer.
Yeah.
She was Olympic caliber.
Yeah.
And decided that all things must come to an end. She was tired of getting in cold pools at 5 in the morning. My wife, you said probably, the real athlete's probably my wife. Take out the word probably. She's
right.
an incredible athlete, and some of our children have her genetics, and others I just apologize to because they got mine. I was like, work my freaking backside off to be slightly better than average. That's not just a humble self-deprecating. Like, I can acknowledge that now. I wanted to play professional sports so badly. And at about 16 years old, I realized DNA mattered.
That counts, right?
I'm really good with PowerPoint spreadsheets, but less so. I'm not terrible.
No.
But I just wasn't a Frank Dolce.
It's a burden being blessed with this talent.
I can only imagine.
Yeah, I think I manage it pretty well.
Curse me with that talent.
Yeah.
There we go.
But that's a podcast for another day.
Invite me back, please.
You're on it. Hey, but I love what you said, because I think this translates into the success you've enjoyed over the course of your life, and to something that we're going to talk about in a minute, but something you're going through now with Traeger. And that is, you said you had to work your freaking butt off. And I've known you for a long time, and I think that's a quality that people recognize, is that you're just willing to put in the effort and the time and the dedication, and that's meaningful.
Yeah, I realized it's interesting for me to think back decades in my life and like the earliest moments where I remember my train of thought. And I was always gritty and determined and willing to do the work. And that's just in my DNA. Like my disposition is, I'm kind of this introverted guy that can put his head down and just grind and grind and grind. I was also like, I was a little kid growing up. When I got my driver's license, I was 5'5", 105 pounds. Far smaller than my 16-year-old daughter, and she's beautiful. And I was a little kid, and so I always felt like I needed to really amplify my confidence and my ability to not sprint marathons, but run 5-minute marathons. Like you had to keep going. And there are also these moments in my life where I remember just looking around me and seeing people and saying, you guys are good. Like you're probably better than me from a talent perspective. I remember sitting in Harvard Business School on my first day in my section, and there are 80 of my section mates. They're Ivy Leaguers. They're, children of very successful CEOs, of prime ministers. And I'm sitting there saying, I always wanted to go to Harvard Business School, and I got rejected, and I eventually got in. And the only way that I win this like deficit of talent, like winning's the wrong word, but I looked around and said, business is competitive, and I'm going to compete with people like this. The only way I win is if I'm willing to just consistently and methodically and in a very disciplined way grind it out, not for these 2 years of business school, but for the rest of my life. And it's sort of interesting. And by the way, I have a real appreciation for grit and consistency. And I've also seen people who I just look at and I marvel at their talent, but it's like they sprint and they stop and they sprint and they stop. And I just think if I keep going, I will eventually figure it out. And if I'm always making investments and doing the right thing in my life, it will lead to good things, even if I can't sprint as fast as the guy next to me. Yes.
Would you say that is the best thing that you do? Is that your best quality? Is the ability?
You know what? It's certainly a superpower. And it's always funny when I have this conversation with my wife, Kristen, for example.
And she's like, why aren't you talented?
No. It's just the opposite.
Kidding.
No, I say, hey, Kristen, we'll somehow end up in a place I'll say, but I'm this average guy that's figuring out, like I have so many learned behaviors in leadership and business, and all of the things are just driven by grit and discipline and consistency. And I'll say this, I'll start the sentence, I'm average, but I've learned to amplify and be better. And she'll say, stop, like you're the smartest guy I know. And
right.
By the way, I don't think she's just stroking my ego. I think she believes that. And like she saw me 30 years into my life, and she saw a lot of that early grit and not sprinting fast, but like consistently moving fast. And it's not self-deprecating. I truly believe that about me. And it doesn't, like, I acknowledge it, and it doesn't hurt my feelings. There are more talented people. And there are also people, when you've got the intersection of more talent and this grit and discipline, that's Michael Jordan. It's like there are incredibly talented people, but he was so talented and he was the hardest working guy out there. And I would say I'm of moderate talent, but like willing to just make it work long term.
Yeah. Well, that's an amazing story. And you mentioned Michael Jordan. I love to fall back on that. Kobe Bryant was that. Tiger Woods, for a major portion of his career, was like that. Those are the guys that are the next level.
They've got it both.
Guys. Well, I want to dig into your background a little bit and where you grew up and how you developed this. I think it's really interesting that Kristen met you at 30. So you had developed all of these characteristics over time. So what she sees is genius, but she doesn't see everything that led up to that. I want to figure out what led up to that.
You know what? Where to start? I grew up in Minnesota, and my dad was my dad was early in his career. He was making not a lot of money. We lived in a restored farmhouse on a cul-de-sac in Minnesota. And not only did he not make a lot of money, my dad's really frugal. Like my grandmother, whose 100th birthday we celebrated on the day of her funeral. I mean, like, she was Scottish and she was, I won't say cheap, she was frugal and resourceful. Right. And so I grew up in the combination. We didn't have a lot of money and my dad was super frugal. And it taught me to work. I knew from a very young age that I had to earn money. And if I wanted a pair of Nike shoes, and I've loved Nike since I was a kid. Yes, there we go. Mm-hmm. My parents weren't buying me Nike shoes. And so at 7 years old, I got a paper route with my older sister. And in Minnesota, I'm out, 5 days a week after school, excuse me, slinging papers. And on the weekends, like Sunday morning, I'm up at like 4:30 in the morning on a 30 below Minnesota winter, pulling a cart, this metal cart that has, it's like just rough, around a mile neighborhood, delivering papers, going back and collecting from people. It's amazing that the number of people that will take the newspaper but then not pay you for it. And like, I wasn't, like, if I wanted to get paid, I had to collect for it. And so I deliver newspapers. I bought a lawnmower when I was about 7 years old, and I started cutting lawns. And so it was just always in me. If I wanted something, I had to do it and I had to earn it. Mm-hmm. And so I was always, when I played Monopoly, I mean, I was like the hoarder of properties. And so, from an early age, there's no question, like, DNA matters. But it's interesting for me to think back and actually to look at, I was one of 5 siblings. I had an older sister who was about a year and a half older than me. And so as the oldest male, I definitely had sort of older child, syndrome's the wrong word, qualities. I'll say qualities. Sure. And it's interesting to look across my siblings, and we're all very different, but I had the DNA and I also had the necessity. And, my dad made money later in life as an entrepreneur, but not while I lived at home. He worked hard, he did well, but he wasn't extremely successful financially until I left. And so it was always on me to think about, how was I going to pay for scout camp? I was paying for half my education. That was our deal. And so there was just a necessity to work hard. And those qualities, honestly, they've just stayed with me throughout my life. And you tackle harder and harder things, and it's like, it's cumulative, but when you connect the grit with the confidence that you can get beyond hard things, even though every hard thing is different, it just, over time, it becomes a, it becomes a superpower.
It is a superpower. I love that story. One lesson from that story, there's many, that I resonate with, is this concept of, you're a kid, you want the Nike shoes, and I don't know, maybe you did go to your dad and say, hey, Dad, could I get some Nikes? And he said, no, go figure out a way to get Nike. Whatever it was.
That's exactly what happened. And actually, and by the way, the teaching moments of, hey, listen, Nike shoes are expensive. We don't buy you Nike, but if you want them, here's how you get them. And it always ingrained in me, I own my destiny. Like, I got to figure it out.
So good.
I actually really appreciate that he did that. And I'll tell you, it's like, as a parent, and I got married a little bit later in life, and I didn't have 2 nickels to rub together when I got married, but I married a woman that made a lot of money. It's not why I married her. Still married.
She saw some potential.
She saw potential. I'll share a story of our second date, which I think she questioned.
Love it.
She questioned our potential, but not to go sideways in parenting. But this is probably what I worry about the most. My children don't have the same necessity that I had, and we faked being poor as long as we could until we just had to sit down and acknowledge, we built this. Like, this is like, we deserve this. We own this. you are not even tenants in our house because you don't pay rent. We are allowing you to sleep in this room, in this bed. But if you want to make it in life, you got to figure it out yourself. We're always here as a sounding board, but you got to go do your hard things on your own.
You're not getting sideways, by the way. This is exactly what I want to talk about. And I'm a parent as well. And I know that battle because, you know, we're pretty sound in our lives, my wife and I, and we can provide our kids with nice things. The challenge is figuring out where do you have that teaching moment of, I want to give my kids all the stuff.
Yeah.
But that's not the best. That's not always the best thing
It's not.
for them. And that you can apply that to your business as well as you're working with people.
Do you know what? I am such a believer. You have to go through hard to get stronger. And it's like, it's sort of funny sometimes when you run a business, when you're an entrepreneur, you realize it's a bumpy path. And I remember early in my career lamenting, it's like, why do we have so many problems in our business? And you step back and you realize business was never intended to be easy. It's too competitive. If it were easy, we would all be very successful, wealthy entrepreneurs. And so I think being willing to go through hard things to like very, very deliberately crystallize what you learn from them, catalog your lessons, and use that as confidence and experience to recognize patterns going forward. You actually, that's how you become someone. And it's interesting for me to look back 20 years in my career and 10 years in my career and even 5 years and say what I've gone through the last 2.5 years, that would have broken me 10 years ago. There's no question it would have broken me. I would have said, this is too much. But when you're always not just getting pushed to the limit, but allowing yourself to be pushed to the limit when you are okay with discomfort and you don't toss in the keys and give up, but it's just like, that's never been an option for me. In the hardest things I've gone through. And it's like, by the way, it's like, it's interesting to sit in this beautiful studio and to live in this great town of Holiday, Utah. And then I start talking about how hard the journey was. I'm like, hard like leaf in a hot tub hard. I mean, it's like and like joking aside, like my career mattered to me and life matters to me and not failing is important to me. And so sometimes like not having great perspective, it's actually been a good thing for me because it's like, what do I really get out of professional adversity? Well, I don't just become better at selling grills or headphones. All of the adversity that's sort of stacked on top of each other has created capability that I own as a human being. And I can apply to anything. And so I've really actually come to love not just looking back at some of the moments where in the middle of them I said, this freaking sucks. This is hard. We are not winning. And like, and there's always this voice in the back of my mind where I say, but we're not only going to get through it, I'm going to look back and say it was good for me. And the evolution of that in my life has been, and this is like, I learned this in my business, but this is what gives me confidence that I and we, my wife and I, we will get it through anything because I went through the hardest thing. And in the middle of it, like 10, 11 months into it, as I'm getting up and looking in the mirror every day and saying, I have an amazing wife. I have 6 amazing kids. I live in a great community and neighborhood, lots of friends, and I'm miserable. I'm like looking in the mirror and saying, like, food's on the table every day. Why am I so unhappy? And as I thought about my 16-year-old daughter, and like, I may be miserable until she leaves for college because businesses don't, you don't build them quickly and you don't turn around difficult moments quickly. The ability to reorient my mindset and say, I'm going through the hardest thing I've been through. but I can be happy while I go through it. And more than be happy, actually what allows me in part to be happy is that the same way when I do something hard physically and to exhaustion, like muscles aching, want to vomit, running up a mountain, and my mind is saying, this is good. Like, Jeremy, this is making you stronger. The ability to be in that moment professionally, which was nothing but a burden, and to say, this is making me stronger, and I'm not going to be unhappy every time I go through adversity. That was the biggest unlock of my life. And, you know, like it happened in the setting of a wood pellet grill business. Like, you got to step back and say, in the grand scheme of life, doesn't matter that much, but it mattered to me. What matters more to me is what I learned, not in a moment, but over the course of many months, where I was able to, for the first time in my life, say, this is not a burden. This complexity and messiness and this, you know, what felt like real adversity, this is a good thing in my life. That
Perspective is so insightful, and the way that you analyze it and incorporate it into your life today and the experience that you use. We're going to talk about what you've been through recently and how you've utilized that experience to work through it. And you're still working through it, if that's fair to say.
We're not winning yet. We're not winning. Here's the difference. We're still working through it. We're not on life support like we were at a moment. We're working through it. It's still messy. It's still complicated. But I am nothing but confident. I am nothing but optimistic. And like the complexity of it, it's like, it's actually a lot of fun for me right now. Like, it's like, I don't think I'll ever be dealt, or maybe I dealt myself this hand of cards. Pandemic, don't totally own. But I don't know that I'll ever be in a situation quite this complicated and messy. And that to me is energizing now. And it wasn't 2 years ago. It just sucked.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And then you mentioned mindset, which I think is very important. That you're a great reader. You've lent me books that I've enjoyed, and you make me think of Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And I know you're familiar with that, but I mean, that's the story of mindset and finding happiness in the most horrendous circumstances.
So I should have read that book during that moment. I've read it multiple times. It's incredible. I did turn through a lot of books. I mean, I read a lot. When I say read, I listen, and I listen while I run up a mountain. Or it's my only peace and solace is just like doing something hard physically and amplifying the experience by just sort of listening to a great book and contemplating, but reading things like Brene Brown. Rising Strong. She talks about going through hard moments like this messy middle. It's like, boy, you know you can't circumvent it. There's no way to move through it quickly. So just say it out. Like, acknowledge you're there. Acknowledge what you're going to learn from it, and like grind it out with a good attitude. You know, very, very different. David Goggins. You Can't Hurt Me. And it's like totally different perspective, but you hear about this guy who has this rough upbringing, and like you can't believe it. And then he decides to be a Navy SEAL when he's like 300 pounds and out of shape,
which makes perfect sense.
But you know, and you listen to the training that he goes through. Not even the training, the actual the qualification to become a SEAL, with broken legs that he's taping in and being in freezing cold water. And so there were a lot of different perspectives that I drew on. And what I was really using them for was a catalyst to create introspection so that I could reorient my mind. And I knew that I had to do it. And it really wasn't easy to do. There was a lot of thought. There was a lot of reading. There was a lot of meditation. And there wasn't like this single aha moment where I said, I got it. But over 4 or 5 months, I started to wake up and say, this isn't bad. Like, I'm doing it, and I'm feeling better about it.
I think that goes back to your childhood story and things that you've talked about earlier is, and maybe you're saying it without saying it, but this idea of grit and determination and I'm going to figure it out attitude. It's in your DNA. And so you find yourself in that situation. There's not necessarily panic, which could be destructive. It's more of, I'm taking the next step. I'm taking the next step. I'm going to figure this out.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is the superpower you're talking about.
Yeah, and I'll say it's interesting because I've always thought about myself as quietly confident. And confidence it's not binary. You have it or you don't. But confidence is relative to what you're going through. And I've never been through anything hard that I haven't believed I would get through. And what's awesome about confidence and experience is that you actually, unlike physical strength, which like it gets really good until some age, and then it starts going downhill a little bit. Not there yet.
Yeah, I think I hit that. That's terrible.
I might be there too. And I really overcompensate to make sure I steady the decline.
Good for you.
But you know what? It's in life, experience and wisdom and knowledge and confidence, it's cumulative until the very end. And so that to me is a really awesome principle. I've never been through anything that I haven't looked at and say, I don't know what the answer is, but I know based on everything else I've gone through, I can go through a brick wall to figure this out. And it's like over and over and over. And the brick walls, you look back and say, well, those were like paper walls. And this is like really a brick wall.
This one's the brick wall, yeah.
And so what I loved about what I went through recently, I never doubted that we wouldn't figure it out, but I doubted if I could be happy during the process. And it's sort of interesting that, there were periods in my life for many, many years, decades. And this is a little bit my disposition and maybe a little bit of a Gen X sort of approach to life, willing to go through a lot of sacrifice to be successful, to make money, like quote unquote, whatever that means. And, I started to get to this moment where I said, but I don't want to be unhappy for the next 3 years because I'm not 20 anymore. Like my life is not all in front of me. I've earned the right to enjoy life, but I will never enjoy life when I'm completely comfortable. And so like, how do I sort of, how do I balance? I want to be happy. I can't quit what I'm doing. It's too important. There are too many people that rely upon me. And I don't want my defining thing in my career to be behind me already. And so I had to figure out, how do I marry the confidence with like some level of, it wasn't even perspective because I didn't have perspective, but a willingness to find a mindset that allowed me to be happy in the moment of the deepest professional pain that I'd felt.
Absolutely. Comfort is a funny thing. Comfort has destroyed more potential than anything else maybe the world has ever known, because the things that you're talking about, the willingness to sacrifice, the motivation, the determination, that starts to get a little iffy. And the great ones somehow maintain that. I always think about that. Why did Jack Nicklaus keep winning? He was wealthy? He was, by any stretch, he was comfortable. I mean, what was in him that kept him winning and practicing and working? And
that's such an interesting question. You could say that about a lot of people that just couldn't be satiated by, and I remember my uncle, who lives not far from here, 10 years ago saying, why don't you just retire? Like, why do you do this? Why are you,
right?
Like I was put a bunch of money in this Traeger business. Like you could lose it all. And you guys are comfortable now. And it's a different mindset. I get bored when I'm comfortable. I've learned to like truly value above all growth in my life, and growth only happens in discomfort. And I'll tell you, like there are definitely moments where I wished I could be a librarian. Like why can't I just go at 9 and leave at 5 and
stack books,
read the newspaper? And
yeah, it sounds so appealing.
I can't do it. I can't do it. Like I'm just not cut out for it. But I will say I find so much joy in the progress that I make in life. And what's interesting about it is like one day it will all end. My career will all end. My life will end. And if I could just sit back and enjoy everything, like this is the paradox, then that would have been worth it. But the reality is I don't enjoy sitting back. And so this is my lot in life. And by the way, it's a terrible, I love it. Like
it's a great, terrible life.
I love the journey. You know,
Yeah.
I have some good friends from business school who made a lot of money early. And I actually sat with an entrepreneur recently, made hundreds of millions of dollars at 30 years old. And, you know, and so I've looked at some of these entrepreneurs that have made money early, and they went through hard, but they never really developed a capability. And when the necessity went away, it felt really appealing to say, I'm going to get great at golf. Like we're going to travel, we're going to buy second, third homes. And like inevitably, what drove them to succeed the first time drives them again. The challenge I've seen them have is that when you put a 10-year gap between success and when you say, I'm bored, you can't really get back in the game. You don't have the necessity. You no longer have the willingness to do something really hard. And you also, it's been years since you've been in the game, so you don't have like fresh skills. And so that to me is like thinking about life not as a destination, but like the journey every day is what gives you joy. And trying to define a destination is like, it's really hard. I mean, like I wanted to be a CEO my life so long, since I was like 11, 12 years old. And I remember the day I became the CEO of Skull Candy. I was the number 2 for a number of years to my majority partner. And I remember the day, you know, Kristen and I were in Prague. We were at an international sales meeting. I got this phone call from the board, and it's like, you're the CEO now. And it was like the most glorious news. For 24 hours. I was on cloud 9. But like, unfortunately, the destination didn't last very long. And and then I
had to get to work.
I got back to work, and I realized that you get to the top of a mountain and you realize there's so many mountains taller. So forget about the top of the mountain. Like enjoy. Sometimes it's a grind. Sometimes it's hard. But if you enjoy the journey, you can actually look back without regrets and say, this is what life was all about.
I really hope people are listening and to your story and all of this great perspective. And I'll go back and watch this because there are so many lessons that I align with and resonate. And it's so great to hear your story, because I think a lot of people look at Jeremy Andrus and say, well, yeah, I mean, his life is wonderful. It's amazing. He's Traeger. He's on the Dan Patrick Show. It's Meat Friday. I mean, all of those things.
The best.
All of those things. You have no worries in the world.
Do you know what? It's interesting. We all have worries, and they all may be like on similar levels. We all have insecurities. We all have moments where we say, oof, this is heavy, this is hard. And it's always interesting to me when I speak to entrepreneurs and someone asks a question that suggests, it's like, I followed you for years on social media. Like, you've had such a good journey. Like, it's like, and they never really say it's been so easy, but there's this insinuation that it just worked out for you. And it doesn't really just work out for very many people in life. It's like, there are some where the journey is just like, it's easy.
Yeah, sure.
They're so good and so talented, and The roadblocks never get in their way. It's very unusual.
Yeah, I think so too. Okay. Great stuff so far, but I wanted to get back to a couple things you mentioned. And if one of these or if any of them are uncomfortable for you to talk about,
then even better. Let's go.
Then just take a sip of your bucked up.
Can I sip anyway?
Yeah, in fact, I think I need to as well.
You want to do a quick commercial break? By the way, I love this product. Cheers.
It's the best.
It's amazing.
I know. And I don't drink energy drinks, but this is one. And by the way, it's 0 sugar. I know that fits in with your lifestyle.
You know, unfortunately, I had already consumed 250 milligrams before I sat down and saw this. And so
you're going to be flying high.
I think this is 300, so 550.
3-ish.
I may sip it slowly.
That's a good idea. That's a good idea. That may be a life lesson right there. Just sip it slowly. You know what I'm saying?
We could go a lot of directions with that one.
Sip it slowly.
Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned, I know something about your past. And I don't know if you...
That just got really uncomfortable. And are you about to say...
And tell now me about I'm going to invite... No.
Tell me about that thing that you did.
Yeah.
And you'd say, oh, no, not that. You don't, not on air. You don't have to say that.
Not that thing. No, you know what's really great is Abby, we call her the Abster. She can edit anything.
You know what?
So,
I'm all about authenticity. Bring it on.
Okay.
Bring it all on.
I think this is part of your life story. I don't know how much you share it or how comfortable you are sharing it. If you're not, don't share it.
Yeah.
But I know something about you that occurred earlier in your life about a trip that you took to South America, and something really strange and interesting happened. And I think that's part of your journey.
Because I have many trips to South America, and I'm going to do my best to identify the one of 2 or 3 things that you might be referring to. Mm-hmm. Was it getting kidnapped in Mexico?
That's the one. Okay. You nailed it.
That was a scary moment, no doubt about it.
How old were you?
I would love to say I was like stupid in 17, but I was actually like 25 years old.
Oh, so you were stupid in 25. Okay.
No. I was stupid in 25, and I was with my cousin and best friend in the world who was 3 years younger than me. Mm-hmm. And if I've ever gotten in trouble in life, which I have, if anything has ever gone bad, it's my cousin Brock. Yeah. And by the way, I love him like a brother. He's my best buddy, but we've had some moments that I said, Brock, this doesn't happen when I'm not with you.
Come on.
And best wingman in the world, and he made my boring life interesting a number of times. Thank you, Brock.
Thank you, Brock. Yeah. Okay, so tell us the story, and what is the perspective that you gained, that you learned from that experience?
Oh my gosh. You know what? I'll tell it quickly. We were going to Israel. We were staying in LA. We had a night before we were hopping on a flight, and said, what do you want to do? We're in LA tonight. What do you want to do?
Let's go south.
And my cousin says, let's go to Tijuana.
Great idea. And this is Brock, right?
This is Brock.
Terrific idea.
And I said, I've been there. I've only been there during the day with my family. I'll go check it out. All right, let's go. And by the way, if he were here to tell the story, he would tell the story very differently. And somehow we have different perspectives on how this all happened. And I think we're both being truthful. One of us just doesn't want to acknowledge the truth. So we went down to Tijuana, spent the late afternoon, got dark. We're trekking up and down Revolucion. He's 22, I'm 25, and we end up in a club. We end up in a college late night dance club. I'm single. Let's clarify.
Okay.
I'm not married at this moment in time.
Good.
Single, no girlfriend. And we're hanging out, having a good time, and we start to leave, and it's this kind of narrow hallway that's it didn't feel sketchy on the way in, but we get surrounded by 6 or 7 gentlemen, I will say, who said they were undercover cops and they saw us dealing drugs in their club. And by the way, I'm a pretty naive kid. I had never seen drugs in my life at that point. I grew up in D.C. and just wasn't interested in drugs.
Yeah.
And I'm like, whatever. And they reach into my cousin's upper pocket and they pull out a cellophane wrapper of crack cocaine. And I'm still like, guys, whatever, let us go. And my cousin says, Jeremy, stop right there. We're in trouble. Now, it wasn't his.
I was going to say, Brock, what are you doing?
Said it wasn't his. wasn't his. And this went on for many, many hours. We stood there and argued with them. We eventually went downstairs with them. We're outside at like 1 in the morning on this main drag, and there are hundreds and hundreds of people walking by, but we're surrounded by these people, and we're kind of whispering, do we run? Like, what do we do? And at this point, I'm scared.
Mm-hmm.
They eventually separate us. They take us different places. They took me to an empty building, sat me down, and this went on for hours. They had knives, not guns. They roughed me up, like not badly, but like they were a little bit physical, but really scared the living daylights out of me.
I'll bet.
They eventually say, come with us. They put me in the back of like this Ford Pinto, like in the hatchback thing. And they take me down this dark alley. There's an ATM machine behind a glass door. Someone's coming out of it. It's like 2:30 in the morning this time. And this guy can't open. He eventually opens and he says, careful, it's booby-trapped in English. And I'm like, okay, what does this mean? I go inside and they say, get money. And I get money and they say, slide it under the door. I'm like, okay, I slide it under the door and they say, get more money. And I get more money and I slide it under the door. The third time they say this, I can't get any more money.
Yeah.
I've reached my $500 limit, which was a ton of money for me back then.
Right.
But I wasn't worried about the money. And then I go to open the door. It doesn't open. I'm pulling, it doesn't open. At this point, pure panic. Pure panic. And the guy says, slide your card under the door and we will, because that's you can use a card to let you into this place. I'm like, what do I do? Like, well, if I don't slide under the door, they're gonna walk away. So I slide my card under the door. They let me out, and one guy puts his arm around me and said, "You know, you got to do what you got to do, right?" And I'm like, "You mother, you freaking
that word."
It's like, if you wanted $500 7 hours ago, I would have given you $500.
There's an easier way to do this.
Terrifying, terrifying. So I walk, they get in the car, and I walk down this dark alley for a quarter of a mile to the main street. At this point, it's 4 in the morning. There's no one. I see my cousin 100 yards away. We sort of walk towards each other. We don't say much. He pulls $5 out of his shoe, and he said, they took all my money. I saved this for a taxi. And so we get into a taxi. We don't say anything. We get to the border crossing. We're waiting in line. As we're waiting in line, we're telling a couple of military guys from Camp Pendleton, a couple of Marines, and one guy, and they're drunk. And he's like, dude, no way. Let's go get guns and we'll go back. Yes. And I'm like,
wait, were you talking to Jack Reacher?
I'm like, no guns. We're done. It's like, we're so close to the border crossing. And I will tell you, when we got into the other side, we got on the other side of the border, it was like home sweet home. I am safe now. Interestingly, like in the interim, my cousin, he got out hours before me. He went to the police department, found the chief of police. Chief of police is like, stupid Americans. I don't deal with this stuff. Now, my guess is these were police officers who were undercover and they're just fleecing us each for $500. But very, very scary moment. I could go on. By the way, the night didn't end there. I mean, like, there was a drunken driver off a bridge that we stopped to help. Then we get on this flight to Israel. And because
you still made the flight.
We still made the flight like 6 hours later. No, but then we arrive in Tel Aviv and we don't have any money. And so there's this couple that's holding up a sign that says youth hostel $8 a night. And we're like, that's it. That's where we're staying tonight. We get in their car and they don't speak English. And like, close. They start driving and driving. And we're out in the countryside. And I turned to Brock and said, this is about to happen again in like 30 hours. And we get to their very humble house. They lead us into this room. There's no sheets on the bed. Actually no beds. They're cots. And they're big freaking cockroaches on the ground.
Oh, yeah.
And we laid on the beds with our backpacks as our pillows, with the lights on. And when the sun came up, we put our backpacks on and we just started walking down this road with a thumb in the air. So I can tell you all sorts of stories. You know what? I travel a lot internationally, and I've always been patriotic. I was like, I'll say figuratively, I kiss the ground when I get back to the United States. And it doesn't matter if I go to China a lot, and I've learned to really appreciate this country and freedom and rule of law. And you know what? I'm sure we have issues and it's not perfect, but I come back from place and I just say, this is my homeland. This feels good to be
and
here.
How grateful.
I can work out anything in this country.
Yeah. Well, there you go. There's my pen.
I love it. And I will also tell you, I am an adventurer. Like I will take on like crazy risk, climbing mountains, jumping out of airplanes, but I've actually become much more like I am a risk-seeking person, but there's certain risk I no longer seek.
Are willing to take.
The frugal part of me, I can afford nice cars when meaning not the cheapest car when we land in Brazil. My wife and I went to Rio, and I remember reaching out to this hotel and they sent options. It's like, you can get the luxury cars or you can get the luxury armored vehicles. And I'm like, well, I don't think I need the armored vehicle, but like in a prior life, I would have said, or I can take a $2.50 cab, like some random car.
Sure.
And I don't take those risks anymore. It's like, especially when I show up with my wife or my family.
Yeah.
And I still love risk, but I love risk in business that has return.
Well, I want to talk about that, the risk that you're taking currently and you've taken with
every day.
Traeger. Yeah, every single day. But you did mention earlier, I want to give you an opportunity if you want to talk about it. The second date. Wait a second. I know we're in Utah. You're not a polygamist, right?
I'm not. By the way, I was taking a sip.
Classic reaction.
Right as you said, second
wife. I meant second date.
I've only had one wife, and I love her to death.
Wife. Yeah, even in Utah, Jeremy Andrus, one wife. Okay, now that we have that all straightened out, second date.
Yeah,
with your wife, she was having some second thoughts.
Couple of things happened on our second date. The first is we golfed together. And I didn't know my wife was an incredible athlete at the time. And she was a golfer. Like, actually, she didn't golf that much, but she was a good golfer.
Yeah.
So we're golfing Mountain Dell. We step up to the first tee box. And she looked awesome in her golf skirt and her tank top. And I'm like, oh, this is like heaven on earth. It's 75 degrees. It's sunny. She just smacks the ball 250 yards down the middle of the fairway. And I know I'm not a great golfer, but I can keep up and I can play a respectable game of golf. But golf is also a mental sport. And
completely.
At this point, I really liked her. I mean, like we saw each other every day for 4 months without fail, except towards the end of November, when I invited her to come with me and my family to Rice Eccles Stadium.
Yeah.
She's a Ute. To watch a football game.
Yeah.
And not only did Utah win, but in the BYU section, she hooted and hollered in her Utah gear. I was upset. My family was embarrassed. We dropped her off at the apartment. I didn't get out to walk her to the door. And it was the only time, like in months, that I hadn't seen her day after day after day.
Oh, this is
like,
the manifestation of the rivalry right here.
Oh, it's like don't get me, guys. She feels sorry for me now. At the time, she didn't. and I was smitten by this woman, like literally from the moment I saw her at a wedding. And she smacks the ball down the fairway, and my head just starts playing mind games. I'm like, I'm not very good at golf.
Oh, no.
I'm not very good at golf.
Oh, no.
And I haven't warmed up.
Oh,
and
you're done.
I went up there and I smacked the ball right into the freeway.
Of course.
Yeah. Right into
Just
the
snap hooked it left.
It was
right onto I-80.
It was so bad.
Oh.
And you know what? And so we played a respectable round of golf. She crushed me. I was embarrassed. She was very kind to me. My confidence was like through the floor. And from there, we said, let's go get dinner. And so we went and grabbed dinner. After dinner, we stopped at, I think it was a Barnes & Noble, because there was an article that had been published about me in Business Week. I only knew that it had just recently come out. And I had interviewed a number of times. They'd taken pictures of me, and I was like really excited to see this. I was kind of proud, you know.
Sure.
Harvard Business School.
Absolutely.
And, you know, high school newspaper didn't write about me, but
now
Business Week, like for everyone listening, Business Week used to be a thing. It used to be a thing called a magazine that you would find at the newsstand.
Or they could deliver it to your house.
That just dated me, yes. And we together found the magazine, and we opened it together. And like this centerfold picture of Jeremy looking depressed, which, by the way, they took 100 pictures of me, and they said, hey, can we take a couple of serious ones? I'm like, sure. You have no idea what they're writing about. Title of the article, Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. I'm home. Now, the whole article was about this Harvard Business School grad who couldn't find, this 2002, tough economy, couldn't find a job, so he moved back into mom and dad's basement. And by the way, I was an entrepreneur starting a business, and my parents had a very nice basement in Park City. So this was not pathetic. I was an entrepreneur paying my parents $150 a month rent for a great basement.
Sounds pretty reasonable.
And I open it, and I'm mortified. I'm like, no. And by the way, the first date, because I didn't have two nickels to rub together, we went out to dinner with a buddy of mine who was an investment banker. The three of us to River Horse on Main in Park City.
Nice. Yeah.
And he paid, which was great.
Excellent.
And we went back to this beautiful house in Park City, and we sat on the couch, and we talked for a couple of hours. And then my parents walk in. Like, hey, what's up, Jay? Hey, I want to introduce Kristen. And after they went upstairs to go to bed, I said, this is my parents' house.
And I stay in the basement.
It wasn't, I wasn't faking that I owned it, but I think she assumed that she read into this too early.
Yeah.
You know what? Good news is she didn't make me sign a prenup. She was the only one that made money at the time. But you know, it's interesting, and I'll tell you, like your comment was spot on, because we laugh about that looking back. She said, I didn't marry you for your potential, but I was definitely attracted to it. It's like, I knew you would become something. And I don't think I've disappointed. I think it's gone okay.
Listen,
but
it was a funny
beginning.
So you have disappointed her in some way. I mean, that's what we do.
Right.
It's inevitable.
Am I perfect? No, I am a flawed human being.
But that's a great story, and I love that story. And it definitely is something about Kristen that she just saw the potential.
You know, she did. And even after all the potential, she is definitely the better half.
Way better. Probably three. I think people call her 3/4 in the deal.
On a good day for me, yeah.
Okay, listen, I want to get into, as we start to wrap up this podcast, and by the way, you've been so gracious and so insightful. I want to get into what you're experiencing now and the things that you're doing strategically to work your way out of it, because I think that's really important. But before we do that, I'm not going to ask you 3 random questions, because I want to get into the other stuff. I'm going to ask you one random question. One random question. Okay. Kyle Whittingham is to me, he's like the apex of collegiate, collegiate football coaches, people. A guy that has taken all of his, whatever talent he has, and maximized it.
Enough already. He's a Ute.
Okay, that's my guy.
This is my wife.
Okay, your guy, who is also my guy, Kalani Sitake.
Yeah.
Who is, I mean, that the only reason that I'll cheer for BYU, which is not really cheering for, I'm cheering for Kalani Sitake. Is Kalani Sitake.
Yeah.
Like, his salt of the earth.
He's warm. He's kind.
He's the best.
Yeah.
He's the best. He embodies the Polynesian spirit of family.
100%.
And Andy hired one of my great friends, Jay Hill, who I think is going to do something. I know. He's amazing. We had that conversation when he got hired. Anyway, okay. Those two are in the UFC cage match. Who's coming out?
You know what? So here's the thing. Kalani has a competitive spirit, but he's so warm and soft. My experiences with him are just like, they're just warm. I just love the guy. I mean, like, you give the guy a hug and it's like, what can I do to be helpful to you?
Right.
I've watched Kyle Whittingham for many, many years, and I only saw him on the sidelines, and either at a game or even more so on TV, and you see this chiseled face, and like, he's intense. And I had made up this narrative in my mind that he was just like, of course, competitive, like cutthroat, a freaking jerk. Like, it's like it's my rival, and like, that's what I saw, and then he would beat me, and it's like, boy, I'll double down on the jerk. And you know what? Then I spent time with him, and this is like, it's not hard for me to acknowledge. So you know what? Look, I think the rivalry is amazing. I would love to win more of the games than we do. But I'll just say that I spent time with him, and I said, I understand why he is so successful. He is not just chiseled, which he is. He is not just cutthroat competitive. He's not just ultra disciplined and methodical, but he is kind. He's funny. Like, I didn't expect him to be funny.
Low key,
like
great sense of humor.
Where does that come from? Like, I didn't see that. I watched him interact with his players, and I could tell there was like this incredible, like, very personal. He was very personable, and he understood them, and there was deep respect for him. And that's when I said, I get it. And by the way, I am a student of leadership. Like, I love to look at others and try and unlock and understand what makes them great leaders. And by the way, super optimistic about Kalani. He's going like,
agreed. I totally agree.
He's much younger. He's learned a lot from Kyle. They're very different stylistically. But that was a really interesting moment for me when I said, like, of course there's something. Like, being a jerk doesn't make you super successful. And he wasn't who I'd made it up, and I should have given him the benefit of the doubt, but I actually really liked him. And I'm always looking at leaders and trying to understand what is it that they've done, and what of that can I incorporate? And I am me. I'm in my style, and I think when we try to be someone else, it doesn't work.
Right.
But there are qualities that we can emulate. And every once in a while, I look at a leader and I say, I'll say Elon Musk, for example, because he's he won't, maybe he will listen to this.
You never know.
I admire the businesses that he's built. I love our Tesla, but the more I read about him, the more I say he's entrepreneurial genius. He's not the leader that I admire. And so I really, by the way, at first I said I would read his quotes and say, this is brilliant, this and that.
Right.
And then the more I got to know, I said, there's genius to emulate, but I think it's easier to find qualities that you can actually incorporate and make your own. It's hard to say, how do I take his genius? And that to me is a lot of fun. And honestly, as I go through my career, it's never about money anymore. Like, The only way it's about money is that I know it's the scorecard. It's a scorecard that matters to me, not because I want more money, but because I know our investors, it's like that's how they measure success. But I love the thought of learning to be a better leader and building a business the right way and being a leader that unlocks value and makes people remarkable because you've built an environment that just inspires them to give more and be more than they were. So for me, that's become a little bit more sort of the fire within in my purpose as a leader and an entrepreneur today.
Yeah, that's great. And I really like what you said about creating an environment for people to be great. I'm paraphrasing, but that's what I heard.
That's it.
Creating an environment for people to be great, because in all organizations, I think you could boil it down to, you may have a great product, you may have a great process, you may have a great something.
Yeah.
Do you have great people, or are you allowing people to be great? And that may be an X factor.
It's all about people in business. Like, it's interesting to step back and look at our business and say, well, we've got a great brand. People would love to have our brand. And we've got great product and it's getting better. You can look at all of the assets that you have, but then you say, those assets get really stale. If our product doesn't innovate, if our brand doesn't continue to get better, Traeger's not worth much. Like, the product's not worth much. And so your people are the leading indicator of your future. And the reality is, it's all you really have. Can you bring great people together and then align them around a similar sort of mission and purpose? And can you do it every day? Can you be a leader? It can not only be a leader, but hire leaders who believe the way that you believe, in that unlocking potential is the only way to win. It truly is the X factor. But also, I think leaders that believe authentically that you do that not just for business purposes, but you do it because life is short and we spend too much time at work. And it's our obligation as a good leader to build an environment that makes people not just better at their skill and better contributors to shareholder value creation, but allows them to become better human beings and go home and just be better mothers, fathers, community members, whatever role they play in life.
All the stuff. Amen. I could not agree more. I'm going to brush over this part of your life briefly, and you can tell me a little bit about it as we get into where you are currently. But I met you when you were at Skull Candy. And in fact, you had either just left or were leaving Skull Candy. We were eating Thai food. You were telling me about some pellet grill company, and I was like,
left. Yes.
I was like, this guy is insane. He seems so bright. Harvard Business School. He's
true,
insane.
not true.
So tell me, just if you can encapsulate it, what were the lessons? What did you take away from your experience at Skull Candy?
Do you know what? Two things, like there's a lot to unpack here, but there are two things that I think a lot about. The first is, I went through this incredible entrepreneurial journey, and it was coming at me so fast, and I was so ill-prepared to sort of take it as it came at me. And it's really interesting for when you think about professional athletes, NFL players, that they get further into their career and they become better players, and they say the game started to slow down. Now, I understood what that meant when I left Skull Candy, and I had time to write and learn and reflect on what had happened. And the biggest lesson I learned was, you can't wait till the end of these 8-year chunks or however long an experience is to really be introspective and to catalog what you're learning along the way. And so I learned a lot as I thought back on those 8 years. I had a lot of time to learn. But Traeger has come just as fast. The game has slowed down a little bit because I have this blueprint from what I learned in the past and more confidence. But the lessons, like the challenges, haven't lessened. They're just different. They're bigger. And I remind myself every day, the purpose is learning. And I'm now almost 11 years into this experience. I can't wait to learn and hope to be there a lot longer. I need to learn every day along the way. So that's sort of lesson number one. The second piece that I think a lot about is that, you know, I really believe that culture is the foundation of building a great organization, not just a business, any organization, a family, a nonprofit, a team, a sports team. It is all about culture. And I remember sitting for a couple of hours with Morgan Scally, speaking of the Utes, and hearing him talk about leadership and culture, and just realizing this principle applies everywhere where people come together. And I felt like at Skull Candy we built a great culture, but I was towards the end, as the chips were down and it was hard and we were the highest shorted stock on the NASDAQ, I was overly permissive of capable people who were culturally toxic. I let them stay. And I told myself, they're good. I can't afford to lose this person. And I look back and realize that if people and culture are the X factor and capability is just a ticket to the ball game, when you let someone with great capability dilute culture and team and camaraderie, it's the worst thing you do. And so that's it. And this is maybe the piece that I'm most proud of as I look at my experience at Traeger. I've had to say goodbye to some people that were not culturally, they weren't multipliers. We'll just say that.
Yeah.
And I love them all. They're friends to this day. But when someone isn't a cultural multiplier, when they're not a fit for the culture that you're trying to build, you just need to say goodbye compassionately.
It's so difficult, but
it's hard.
They say culture eats strategy for lunch. I believe that.
It's true.
It's so true. I don't know if you remember when Alex Rodriguez, the most talented baseball player in Major League Baseball, was traded to the Yankees. I'm a Yankees fan. Derek Jeter, the captain. Alex Rodriguez, the cooler. That's what I call him, because he killed the culture. How many more World Series did the Yankees have in them without Alex Rodriguez, the talent, the most talented person?
So I'll just say, from a Boston, a kid who grew up in Boston's perspective, I was okay with that. But you know what? It's so true. It's so true. And yet the hardest thing to do, and by the way, culture is manifests no more than in sports. And as a fan, you may not realize that, but culture is what makes teams great. And it's really easy to say, you can justify 1,000 different ways. He or she is so talented. I can't possibly, it's not that bad. Nobody's perfect. You can, and it's justifies is the wrong word. You can rationalize until your culture is no longer valuable. And I just believe, nip it in the bud.
I agree.
People can have bad days.
Sure.
But figure out how to be a cultural filter in who you allow in.
Yeah.
And culture is like, there's as much art as science to sort of figure out how do people belong and fit. And when you realize you made a mistake, everyone's going to find a new team. Everyone's going to find, a new business. Everyone's going to get a paycheck. Anyone reasonably good.
Right.
Don't allow them, for the sake of everyone else who deserves to be part of something great, don't allow them to stay.
I agree. I think Phil Jackson's genius. Now, he seemed to have the knock on Phil Jackson is that he always had the most talent, but the ability to take that talent,
incredible,
and mold it
with some real characters,
real characters, and hard-headed and willful, and
the Dennis Rodmans of the world, right? I mean,
I'm not kidding. I mean, I think he showed up to a game in a wedding dress. Didn't that happen?
But he fit, and he built a culture, and
they found the fit for Dennis Rodman, where he was additive to the culture, and not a distraction,
100%.
Even with all his craziness. So, how do we become more like Phil Jackson, I guess? Okay, that's incredible. More incredible perspective. Okay, so here we are today with Traeger, and I'm a huge Traeger fan. I've had 3. One that I blew up, probably because of user error. That's another story.
The product has gotten better since then.
I've always loved it. It has, I was a guy who could grill outdoors, and who knew how whatever I was cooking was going to turn out. I have now perfected whatever I want to cook, and it's not me. It's the grill. And I think it was just named.
It's you.
I think it was just named for 2024 the best pellet grill available on the market. I think I just read that.
So it has. We actually, a couple weeks ago, we were named by Fast Company the 6th most innovative company in North America.
Amazing. That's amazing.
So I'll tell you what. So Traeger's been a journey, and
tell it.
The first couple years were hard because we were rebuilding team and defining culture and let 100 people go. And I don't say that in a cavalier way. It was a really hard thing to do. But then we built something that started to grow, and it grew year after year after year. Many years in a row grew at a north of a 30% top line CAGR from, $700 million, from $70 million to nearly $800 million. And it grew really, really nicely until we got to the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And then it went straight up. And when the pandemic ended, it went straight down. And it was really this, you could not create a more perfect storm of badness. It's like inflation went through the roof. Transportation from China went up 10x. And we shipped these big, heavy grills from China. So it crushed our margins. We went into 2022 expecting to have a decent year, and consumer behavior shifted. Consumers said, done buying stuff. I want to go to Europe. I want to go to Hawaii. I want to go to Taylor Swift. I want to pay money for experiences, which I couldn't have during the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And so we not only have low margins, but we have lots of inventory. We have $400 million of debt on the balance sheet. So reasonable leverage when we went public that turned into too much leverage, and revenues didn't track. And so 2022 was a really, really hard year, and it took me a while to get my sea legs. It really did. And we talked about some of the things that I went through as I, as I navigated the adversity. And I'll tell you what, we're now sort of 2 years beyond that period where I started to gain my confidence back and really build a plan for the future. And there are a lot of things that I could point to in terms of how to manage how to really decouple culture from performance, because sometimes they're tied, and winning begets better culture, and there's momentum. But sometimes poor performance puts so much pressure on culture that it doesn't survive. And we had this moment where I woke up and said, we're not doing right by our people and our culture because the pressure is so intense. So there are lots of leadership lessons, culture lessons. What I've been, and we're in such a good place from a leadership and a team and a culture perspective right now, that what I think the most about, and it's because I like where we are from a people perspective. I love how we've rebuilt strategy. We've been super disciplined. But business is always uncertain. The future is always uncertain. What I believe is that although the near term you can't predict, I don't know what 24 is going to look like. Interest rates haven't started to come down yet. They will sometime soon. But I have this really strong fundamental belief that if you do the right thing in terms of the investments that you make, in our case, there are two things that are sacred: our product experience and our brand or our community. Mm-hmm. And if we continue to make the right investments in these two things, at some point we're going to start winning again. I really believe that. And it's interesting, once I stopped feeling sorry for myself as we were going through this, and I started receiving inbound books of smaller grill businesses that wanted to be sold because they couldn't survive. Oh. I had this aha moment, which is everybody's suffering right now. Mm-hmm. So what is winning really? It's navigating this better than our competition. In the frothy moments, your worst competition looks pretty good. And I said, this is a moment for us to get ahead. Now, it may take a few years because you rebuild team and strategy and you make investments, and it takes time to harvest these things. But I looked at it as a moment to reposition our business. And We continue to spend on brand and community because we needed our community to be engaged. And we doubled our investment in product. Like literally in the last 12 months, our product team is twice as big as it was. And it's not because we're spending inefficiently. I said, we are going to invest in product and in brand. We're going to get lean everywhere else that doesn't touch the consumer.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, this is going to be a winning formula. I don't know exactly when, but I do believe that the cream floats to the top.
Sure.
Do the right thing, you'll win.
Yeah.
And you look at a Nike, Nike, you go back to the 80s and there was a moment where it looked like Reebok may win the sneaker war. And,
right.
And there was a moment where Adi looked like it was going to win, and New Balance came on strong at one point.
Mm-hmm.
What did Nike do? They just kept doing the right thing for their brand and for their product, and they were consumer centric. And so I look at that and it gives me a lot of confidence that, winning in 24, like we've got to redefine that a little bit because it's still a hard year from a macro perspective. But we're just going to continue to do the right thing. And I think in business, that's such an obvious cliche thing to say. But when you're the CEO of a business and your revenue drops and your profit drops more, it's really easy to justify, I'm going to pull back on investments for this year. I'm going to let a little bit more cash flow through. I'm going to generate more profits just because I'm tightening the belt. But I'm going to slow my investment.
Mm-hmm. It's so great. And I'm so glad that you painted that picture leading up to this because, and especially the being introspective, like you have to take all of these things. And I would guess that you would say right now in this hard time that you're also taking this opportunity this is a learning time. This is a time for growth because right now we're in the fire. Like
the growth never stops. It just never stops. I look back a year ago and say, I don't know how I ran the business with what I knew then. By the way, I was off site with my leadership team a couple of days this week, and I had an incredible learning experience where as a leader, I did something that you shouldn't do. I got after a teammate in a very aggressive way.
Mm-hmm.
And when the CEO gets a little bit overly animated and pounds his fists with his Traeger Super Bowl ring, that it just makes loud noises.
Yes.
I left, and actually before I left, I said, hey, before folks take off, I need to apologize. I didn't manage that moment the right way. And do I regret it? Yeah, I wish I hadn't done it, but I'm really grateful that I learned from it.
Mm.
And so it's always learning all the time. And that's just what it's like. The learning and discomfort actually makes the experience super satisfying.
Sure. I can remember a time way back when, very similar experience with Coach Ron McBride in a team meeting. And we had one of our teammates who was not living up to the standard of Coach McBride. And I think you could resonate with what happened in that meeting. And I'll tell you what, from the employee teammate perspective, we walked out of that meeting with a new sense of motivation.
That's awesome.
And the desire to improve every day. So
that's leadership, by the way. Like he put wind in your sails because of his wisdom and what he said.
Yeah.
Like I want to learn to do that.
I think you are doing that. But the thing about you is you're always saying, I need to get better. I need to improve. And that's part of the thing about you. So let me ask you, in all of this experience right now that you're going through right now, have you made any mistakes?
Oh my gosh. All the time. Like it is interesting. I make them, I acknowledge them, I commit to not make them again. Sometimes I do, but like I am a believer. There's nothing wrong with making the mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
What's wrong is if you don't like really learn from them, and you just like you can't make them very often, or you start to lose credibility as a leader. And so the mistakes happen every day, and you know what? It's the desire to learn is in part driven by this belief that if your learning and your growth is behind you, like just hang up the cleats.
Mm-hmm.
Like what are you doing if you're just showing up and going through the motions? So that's actually something that I really preach to my team as well. It's like, don't just show up to do your job and to do it better and to do more of it faster. Show up because this is part of your journey of learning. I promise you, you will be more motivated. You will feel better. You'll have more fire if every day you're sort of looking back and saying, I'm actually a little bit better. I'm a little bit stronger. I learned from that experience. I think it's human nature. It's hard when you get into a rut where you're not.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, it's really, really liberating when it's like day after day, I'm finding something new to learn.
What are the best things that you're doing right now? When you go home after a day of work and you're introspective, what are the things that you say, yeah, that worked really well today. I'm going to continue to do that.
Do you know, so it's interesting. I tend to not, my lessons don't come at the end of the day. Like my introspection, my brain is somewhat fried when I leave the office. It's like kind of a weird moment where my office is in the middle of the building. I don't get direct sunlight, and I'll walk out. I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't know it's beautiful and sunny. And then I go home and I am with my 6 crazy kids, and I put my phone on the shelf, and I'm so exhausted by the time my head hits a pillow. But I wake up at 5, and I spend an hour between 5 and 6. And one of the things I do is just think about the day before. And I ask myself, what I did. And it's interesting, but Kristen didn't know this about me until recently. And she thought it was really interesting because she doesn't do this. Kristen, like, she just keeps going and going and going. I'm like very thoughtful and calculating. Kristen's like, let's go faster. And like, and by the way, the most productive, high energy human being I know she's an extrovert. I'm an introvert. I find real need to in quiet moments, think about where I am and just sort of assess. And I'll think, ooh, I was rough on my CFO yesterday. Like, how could I have managed that interaction differently? And even, boy, I lost my patience with my boys when they wouldn't give bed. You can be a better dad. Like, how do I manage that differently? And so, you know, what I'm focused on, it's a lot of different things, but I wake up and I'm able to clearly process where I was the day before. Mm-hmm. And I just have this real desire to be a better human being every day. And, you know, that may sound good. The problem with that is that I wake up every morning and say, okay, I can do that better. I should have done that better. And there are some days where I say, you know what? When my head of sales didn't deliver and I was pissed off and I gave him feedback, I did it really respectfully. That's a win. Chalk that up as a win. Yeah. So I try and acknowledge the good and the bad, but I'm driven more by the mistakes than by the successes.
It's very Marcus Aurelius of you, what you're talking about, because his book, now published, The Meditations, was not written for the public. That was his daily.
So interesting.
Right? That was his daily. What did I do well? What can I learn? How do I get better? Yeah. He wrote that for himself. And then we were lucky enough to find some of it.
That's super interesting. You know, we all do it differently. And by the way, I'm just sharing experiences. There is no advice in anything that I've said. And I've realized that, you know, giving life advice is like, it's like giving relationship advice. You don't really know how someone feels. You can't really process the nuances, but I gladly share experiences, but also acknowledge where there's value, take it and use it, but understand that we all navigate the journey differently. It's really important to grasp as much wisdom as you can from other people, learn from as many of other people's mistakes and successes as you can, but figure out who you are. How do you find energy? How do you get better? What gives you joy? And like, it was interesting when I was telling Kristen the other day I did this. I'm like, yeah, I wake up every morning and I think it was actually in the context of me apologizing to her for something. And I said, one of the things I think about every morning is like, how can I become a better husband? And I was thinking about that this morning, and I said this thing yesterday, and I'm so sorry. I'm working on that. And she's like, you do what? And it's like, I don't do that. I just love you every day, and I try to be great to you every day. It's like, you know what? Know that it comes from a place of goodness. And that's when I realized we just do this thing so differently.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, it's part of what makes it such a great complement in marriage. But I think every human being needs to find what are the moments that you use, and then how do you really amplify them over time?
Mm.
That's taken me years to figure out.
And maybe we'll never get it completely right, but
it's a progress. It's always process.
Absolutely.
Progress.
I will push back on you a little bit, because I am going to say there has been incredible value that you've provided today. Unbelievable value, lessons, advice, without actually saying, do this, just through your experience. I really appreciate that.
Thank you for saying that.
Absolutely. I have one last question for you.
Please.
And it's not Utah BYU.
Ah, shoot.
How important is physical fitness to you in your life and your success?
It's incredibly important to me. And you know what? Actually, I have almost always been fit. I love to be fit. I love to be active. And as I went through this really difficult moment my last couple of years at Skull Candy, what I learned was, looking back, I was out of shape. I was working till so late, and then I would rip my body out of bed. I would roll out of bed. I would shower. I would go to the office. And there was this very vicious cycle of my body, my mind. I just wasn't in a good place. And you know, at the end, I said, I've got to, I realized you just don't feel good physically, and that's affecting this, and what you're going through is keeping you from getting out and just pounding the pavement, whatever it is. And I started doing yoga, and I really did it first for my mind. But as I was doing hot yoga 4 mornings a week at 5 in the morning, I started to, I saw the definition get stronger. I felt good because I was, for an inflexible person, I was more flexible. And I said, okay, this is one of my lessons. My mind needs this as much as my body. And I would never let that go. I would venture to say there have been very few weeks in the 12 years since I left Skull Candy that I haven't exercised 6 days a week. You know,
amazing.
If I have been deathly ill, of course, it's the least important thing. But if, bad cold, head hurts, short night, and I really have learned to value sleep, I'll still get up and I'll grind out intervals for 15 minutes on a spin bike.
Something.
But what I truly love, my passion, is running up a mountain in the winter with spikes on, with a headlamp, on the ice, in the dark, and just thinking. And as I'm panting and just enjoying the outdoors and feeling like between the physical and the mental, I'm unlocking ideas that are important to me. I've realized physical fitness is an important part of my life.
Absolutely. And I would concur. Most of my clarity comes in those moments of being outdoors, in nature, struggling a little bit.
Totally.
When you're completely consumed by, hey, I gotta figure out a way to get through this.
Get your heart rate up. And interestingly, something happens up here at the same time.
It's so crazy. Yeah. The life, the body and mind are completely connected. I don't think there's no secret why maybe this flexibility thing, your physical flexibility with yoga maybe opened up your mental flexibility 100%. As well.
I don't doubt it at all.
Yeah, no question. Anyway, I'm gonna wrap it up right there.
Awesome.
You have been so insightful and so great. I think you owe me Thai food. I'm pretty sure that's how it goes.
I'm confident. I'll take you to the restaurant you took. Wait, no, it's closed. You find the restaurant, I'll pick up the tab.
And listen, I'm going to tell you this. There's no doubt. I know where Traeger is now. I know where it was based on our conversation today, based on all the things that I know about you. You're leading the comeback. This is going to be the great comeback story of Traeger. We're going to see it right back on top. No question.
Plan on it.
No question. There he is.
Good to see you, brother.
President CEO Jeremy Andrus. Couldn't appreciate it more.
Thanks, Frank.
Thank you for listening to the Know Your Ship podcast presented by eHub. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review.